Chapter 12 The Departed. Darla was an ordinary girl. She loved the typical things in life, hanging out with friends, shopping, and going out to eat. She was also a nature girl and enjoyed long walks in the fall to take pleasure in the multicolored leaves high up in the trees and how they randomly gravitated so gently to the ground, making snow angels in the winter by day and watching the beautiful white flakes, glistening from the lights of the stars from her bedroom window by night, walking through the neighborhood early spring mornings as the sun peeked over the horizon so she could enjoy the beautiful array of colorful flowers slightly hinted with the dew in everyone's front yards, and splashing around with friends in cool water at the nearby lake during the hot summers. Everyone adores Darla. She has a sweet personality and absolutely loves to have fun. They also admire her because she could eat anything no matter how many calories it contained and will never put on a single pound. She was 29 years old and still weighed only 125 pounds, which was not far from the same amount she weighed in high school. As a free spirit, she was spontaneous, had no children, and was not tied down to any particular guy. She dated here and there, but preferred socializing more with the group of friends she had known for years. However, she was always welcoming to any newcomers who were a friend of a friend. Their favorite place to socialize together was Boulder Park. It got this name from having so many different sized and shaped boulders and rocks throughout the recreational area there. They would sometimes bring lunch, a frisbee, and a ball to just enjoy the day there together with no worries. Darla also often used the beautiful area of rocks, trails, trees, and benches when she wanted some alone time to think, especially since she lived only a 10-minute walk away. Boulder Park was the safest place of all. No major issues had ever been reported there, only a couple of complaints of a few disobedient guys riding their mopeds through the trail, which was prohibited. Darla practically grew up in Boulder Park. Her parents took her there often as a child growing up, and she continued the tradition as an adolescent and adult. Although Darla was overall very happy, she still had inner issues she was grappling with, mainly of which direction to go in her life. She was ready to have a career, but was unsure of exactly what she wanted to do. She did not want to be stuck doing a job she hated, but knew it was time for her to make a decision, especially since her parents were starting to be on her more about what she was going to do with her life and how long does she plan on living with them. They loved Darla dearly, but knew it was time to nudge her out of the nest. She decided to go to her favorite thinking place at the park by a huge rock she loved to sit on. She took her notepad and a pen to write down different ideas about her future, as well as the pros and cons of which career path to take. She yelled up to her mother, as she was leaving out of the front door, "I'll be back, Mom. I'm going to the park for a bit." It was midday in the middle of April and slightly chilly out, but still sunny and beautiful. Darla was writing and thinking alone on her favorite boulder. She loved how it was so huge with craters throughout it, which helped her have a good grip to climb up and sit at the very top of it. The park was usually bustling with people walking, jogging, biking, or picnicking on the weekends, but was quiet and empty today since most of the populace were at work or school with only an occasional person in the distance every so often. Night began to fall. Darla's mother began to worry that she was not back yet for dinner. She tried calling her, but the phone kept going straight to voicemail. She left several messages, but Darla did not return any of her calls, which was out of character. Darla's father told her mother not to worry and maybe the battery went dead. Mrs. Copeland reminded Mr. Copeland how Darla would have been back by now after going to the park for several hours, especially since she went alone, knew her cell phone battery was getting low and wouldn't dare be out there alone in the dark regardless of how safe it was. At about 10 p.m. Mrs. Copeland began calling a few of Darla's friends to see if they had heard from her. They each said no, or not today, or not since yesterday. When the clock struck midnight and she still was not back, Mrs. Copeland and her husband went to the park themselves. Mr. Copeland grabbed a flashlight since the park is only dimly illuminated at night from the lights surrounding the city. They walked through the park together, calling out to her, "Darla! Darla!" There was no response. They called the authorities who said they would have to wait until the next day to file a missing persons report since Darla was 29 years old, had been last seen earlier that day, and has the right to go missing if she wanted to. The officer also tried to calm Mrs. Copeland by telling her, "We get these calls all the time. The person usually shows back up by the next day." It did not go well. Mrs. Copeland knew her daughter. Disappointed and upset, the Copelands continued calling her phone, her friends' phones, and walking through the park, calling for her. It became very late, so they went home, got a little sleep, and the very next morning at daybreak, which was only a few hours after they went to bed, went right back out to the park. A few of Darla's friends went with them after concern continued to grow. There were several of them, walking around the park and looking in Darla's favorite spots to see if there were any signs of her. One of her friends came across her notebook and pen, which was barely visible and embedded between a couple of the boulders, right next to the one Darla always climbed and sat on. Mrs. Copeland used this information to contact the police again. A few squad cars were sent out to investigate. One of the detectives put the notebook and ink pen into a plastic bag, and a missing persons report was filed. Darla's parents and friends went back to the house and immediately began creating and printing missing person signs to post around the city and the park. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Darla was still not heard from. Family, friends, the authorities and the community were baffled as to what happened. The detectives did their routine questioning to everyone close to Darla and others who lived nearby the park and her home. Nothing came of it. Eventually, those months turned into years, and no one ever heard from Darla again. Her friends were all building careers, getting married, and having children. Mr. and Mrs. Copeland, now well into their 70s, remained brokenhearted, but still kept a glimmer of hope that did not seem to be shared by many others. Darla would now be 51 years old, but everyone remembers her as the young, happy, and free-spirited 29-year-old she departed as. An anonymous writer left this poem at the last location Darla was known to have been before she went missing. Departed soul, I do not know you personally, but I still feel your pain. You lost one of the closest people in your world, but their spiritual presence will remain. This is a different time for you, but others who care will help you maintain. They were born your loved one, and left just the same. Sometimes things happen, and cannot be explained. Remember them by the good times, and know it's okay for cries. They're now the angel on your shoulder, who will still be there for your lows and highs. It was time for them to rise, into the heavens and the skies, where we will all meet again, when our time has arrived. Words of wisdom, always build and treasure memories. One day for every single one of us, it will be all that is left of genuine meaning for our loved ones.